I just got back home from my first movie screening of 2025. It's a movie called Wolfman, and I am kind of all over the place with my thoughts on this movie. So I thought I'd just come here, flip on the camera, record my overall thoughts to let you know whether I think this is something that you should spend your time and money seeing in theaters. What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here, and if you want to keep up to speed on all the new big shows and movies coming out, make sure you subscribe. So first, I'll share a little bit of information about Wolfman, then I'll tell you about some of the things that I liked with the movie, and there are a few things, and also some things that I didn't like at all, but we'll get into that a little later. First up, if you don't know what this movie is, let me tell you a little bit about Wolfman. Now, Wolfman is one of the Universal monsters, and if you don't know what those are, we're talking classic Universal Studios horror movies like The Invisible Man, I believe Frankenstein and Dracula, The Mummy. These are all the Universal monsters, and of course, Wolfman is one of those. Now, a few years back, they tried to do this whole kind of Universal monster universe where they kicked it off with the Mummy movie starring Tom Cruise, which went horribly. It did not do well at all, and it kind of killed the whole franchise idea. And since then, we've seen a couple other spin-off remakes. There was The Invisible Man that came out a few years ago, which was actually pretty good. And now, of course, we have Wolfman. Both of those movies are directed by Leigh Whannell, who also directed, I believe, Insidious 3, I want to say, or one of those movies. He also directed a movie called Upgrade, which I think they're making a TV show about. It was kind of this action sci-fi movie. And of course, as I mentioned, The Invisible Man. So he's got a pretty solid track record. He works a lot with Blumhouse, which is that horror studio that does a lot of these lower, more moderate budget horror movies. And so going into Wolfman with his track record, I felt that, okay, this is probably going to be at least decent, if not surprisingly good. And boy, was I wrong. The movie also stars a couple of people that you might recognize. First up is Julia Garner, who was in Ozark. You definitely, if you don't know that show or know her, you at least know one specific meme. I'll try to throw that up here. But she plays the wife to Christopher Abbott's character. Christopher Abbott was most recently in Kraven the Hunter, where he played the foreigner. And he didn't really get to shine so much in that movie. He had a few pretty cool scenes, but you just didn't know a lot about his character. So I was excited to see what he could do as a leading man in his own movie. And let me go ahead and start with some of the things that I liked about this movie, because I always like to start positive. And first off, this is absolutely a creature feature. There's a lot of really cool practical effects. It is super gory in some scenes, and for those that are queasy and have a hard time watching these kind of physical scenes where things are getting ripped apart and cut open, if that's something you can't handle, then you might not like it. But if you enjoy the creative aspect of, actual physical effects and prosthetics and things like that, this movie does not hold back with it, and it does a really good job, especially considering its budget. So you have some really great physical effects. I think overall the concept, obviously I enjoy werewolf movies as much as the next guy, but I like the way that they treated this werewolf movie as if it was an illness. Like he was coming down with a sickness and he was kind of slowly slipping away from his humanity and into this otherworldly creature. And so it was less wolfish and more he is sick and is becoming corrupted and changing over time. So I like that spin on it. I also think the setting is pretty good. I mean, it's kind of your typical setting. They're in a house in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere, and they have no phone service, and it all takes place over one night. And so I kind of like that setting, even though it is pretty typical. It's exactly what you might expect from a movie like this. Also, the movie is a tight 90 minutes. It's 90 minutes in length, which I feel like is the perfect length for most horror movies or, even most comedies or a lot of action movies. 90 minutes is right there in that sweet spot. However, I will also say, and this is leading into the negatives, it felt a lot longer than 90 minutes. I'll tell you that right now. The entire movie takes place in one night, and it is the longest night I think I've ever experienced in a movie. It feels like it drags on so long. Oh, but you know what? Before we get more into the negatives, one other positive I did want to mention, I just remembered, is I like some of the cinematography choices. They do a really cool thing as he's transitioning into the werewolf, where you see his perspective of the people around him and then their perspective of him. And the way that they shift that and the way that they kind of show how his view of the world around him is just getting warped, I thought was really cool. So that's one other thing I want to mention. The cinematography, really cool. But as far as the negatives are concerned, yes, there was the fact that the movie felt like the pacing was off. It took a lot longer than I feel like it should have, or at least it felt that way. The concept, the point around what's happening to him. They tried to tie it into, it's not just a guy is becoming a wolf. Of course, there's an allegory and there's a deeper meaning to it all. And that's cool. I like when they do that, except in this movie, they did it so clunkily. It was so on the nose that flat out at several moments through the movie, they have characters explaining practically to camera, this is what's going on, and this is how we feel right now, and this is the problem that we're dealing with. And I think they tried to make it seem like that wasn't what they were doing, because the third character in the movie, the third, I guess, main character is Christopher Abbott and Julia Garner's daughter, who is, under 10 years old, I believe, I want to say. And so they try to make it feel like, oh, well, they have to tell her what's going on. They have to explain to her what they're feeling and why they're acting the way that they're acting. And it feels like such an excuse. It feels like you just didn't know how to express these things, to express these emotions, to express these concepts visually. So you just went straight dialogue down the camera and explained to the audience what's going on, which is very lazy writing. And not only that, conceptually, when it comes to the writing was lazy, the dialogue was just not good in so many scenes. Christopher Abbott's a pretty good actor. Julia Garner's a good actress, but they were having to deliver these lines that just felt so unnatural. And I choose to believe that was not their fault, because they are capable actors and actresses. It has to have been the script writing. And of course, this was written by Leigh Whannell and Corbett Tuck, who I'm not familiar with, but the dialogue and just the overall script, I feel like needed a lot of work. And overall, the kind of allegory that is the story and the point that they're trying to get to with this wolf transformation, it was so not only on the nose, but was kind of, oh man, I don't know how to word it. It was troublesome. It was very troublesome. And I'll try not to spoil anything about the movie, but what we do understand just from looking at the trailers is that the father is turning into a werewolf, right? And they're tying that into kind of his own upbringing and some of the toxic qualities that may have been passed on to him from his father, and kind of treating this werewolf disease, this lycanthropy, as an allegory for generational trauma and generational toxicity that you might pass on from parent to child. And I say that, and you might think like, oh, is that just what you're getting out of it? No. That's what they tell you in the movie. A character almost flat out says that exact thing to let you know, in case you didn't catch it, in case you weren't paying attention and didn't realize that that's what they were trying to get across as their main point for the movie. Let me just tell you flat out, this is about this. And so they tell you that in the most clunky of ways. And the solution to dealing with this kind of generational trauma and all of that, and I can't say without spoiling the movie, but I'll say this, it's not to find a positive solution. It's not to seek help. It's not to, care for that person. It's probably the worst possible solution you can imagine. And so you present this whole allegory of generational trauma and toxicity and all of that, and your solution is basically just like, well, screw them. And I'm like, wow, that's rough. So yeah, it's really hard for me to recommend Wolfman, despite the fact that if you are a horror fan, if you're a fan of these creature features, there's a lot of cool stuff to look at. The cinematography is good. The special effects are really cool. And I love werewolves. And so, if you enjoy that kind of thing, it's fun to look at. But if you look beneath the surface even slightly, it is a problematic and largely unenjoyable movie. So I will absolutely not be recommending Wolfman. If you have a different perspective on it, if you've seen it yourself and you got something completely different out of it, please let me know in the comments below. Let us all know. Let's talk about it down there. I really had pretty high hopes for this, and it unfortunately let me down. So let me know what you think in the comments below. And of course, if you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies coming out, make sure you subscribe. All right, I'll catch you in the next one. Be good.